Hello and welcome to Business Today. I am Siddharth Zarabi and with me here is Sumant Sinha, the Chairman and CEO of ReNew. Sumant, welcome. It's day 2 here, a macro theme of the intelligent age. Your first observations of what the flavor at Davos this year has been so far.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. Great to be here, of course. I think the interesting thing this year about Davos so far has been really focused on the mind of Davos has been focused on the US. And with Trump's inauguration yesterday, all the executive orders that he signed, I think I was at a dinner yesterday and the whole conversation was about what is going to be the impact of Trump on the rest of the world. And there were people from Europe who spoke about what they'll have to do. Feedback coming in from people in China, and of course we from our standpoint spoke as well. So I think a lot of the focus is on how is the geopolitics of the next few years going to evolve now with this very I think new element of Trump having taken over. And that so far at least has been what's happening.
With some of the initial steps and the commentary that we have heard in the run-up, and we don't know what will happen, but the sense that some people seem to be having is that it's going to be an anti climate administration, at least in the way that we saw it. Is that something that concerns you, that you could see?
Actually it's interesting. Obviously one of the first acts Trump took when he took office is to take the US out of the Paris Climate Accords. But fortunately, we have a playbook for that because the same thing happened, when he was president the last time. And I would say that things may have slowed a tad bit, but the rest of the world really continued to pull forward. And I think now the energy transition is being driven more by economics than really by government support. And that's a very important change. So even in the US, you will see that clean energy will continue to proliferate because it is just economically making much more sense. And so I think for that reason, the energy transition will certainly move forward.
So a short-term hiccup, that may happen, but you're saying economics will drive the transition.
I think economics will drive the transition for sure. I think where there might be an issue is with respect to the rest of the climate effort, beyond just the energy side. Things like carbon markets, and of course, how might changing trade because of new tariffs impact the whole climate change agenda. I think those are things that we'll have to wait and see how those evolve. But on the energy transition part, at least, I am a little bit more sanguine because also I think the US's strategy is all of the above as far as energy is concerned. So it's not like they're going to differentiate or penalize any one versus the other. I think they're going to just open it up and let the best generating source win as it.
What does this scenario mean for Indian energy transition efforts? Is there any linkage, at least from a capital and technology point of view? What's your view?
Not really. I think India is a very large market on its own right. India has its own momentum and its own factors that are driving the growth, not the least of which is the Prime Minister's own desire to push forward on the clean energy agenda. I think we have, as I said, a large enough market that, we can set up our own manufacturing supply chains and so on. I think the only linkage might be whether Indian solar manufacturers are able to export equipment into the US market or not, which has been so far a reasonably big opportunity. Depending on what the US's policies are vis-a-vis Chinese imports, that may continue to grow.
Okay. In terms of the transition within India, since we almost do this as an annual conversation, Davos to Davos, between last and now, what are the improvements and any fresh challenges that you've seen emerge?
I think, look, in India, just to talk about India for a second, India is well advanced on the whole clean energy transition target. In the last 2 years, Siddharth, it will be surprise you to know that various Indian governments, central and state, have auctioned off almost 130,000 megawatts, 130 gigawatts of new renewable energy capacity, which will get set up over the next 4 or 5 years. But that momentum, that head of steam, certainly has got built up. And I think now over the next 4 or 5 years, you'll see all of this getting installed. And so it's very clear to me that in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll actually get to the target of 50 gigawatts a year installation. And then that'll get us very close to our target of 500 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. So I think as far as India is concerned, we are on the right track. Now the government is beginning to focus very strongly on batteries to reduce the intermittency and through round-the-clock power solutions. And then eventually we are also developing the supply chain so that we are not dependent on, let's say, China or anybody else. So I think all the right things from a policy standpoint are being done. The one thing I would point to is fixing the discoms. That has always been an outstanding demand of ours, continues to be the case, but that's a state subject.
Yeah.
But that's an important aspect that does need to be fixed. Transmission line build out, all of that is happening at pace. Coming to the global clean energy transition, I think now what is happening is that there is a bit of a change that I'm sensing. Up till now, the conversation on climate change has always been about mitigation. How do we stop the climate from changing? I think with 2024 having crossed 1.5 degrees centigrade, which was the magic threshold that the UNFCCC had set, I think it is very clear now that we've blown past that deadline. And therefore, we now need to start thinking much more seriously about adaptation. And what do corporates need to do to manage risk? And then you have, events like the wildfires in LA shows that nobody's immune, right? However wealthy or prosperous you are, nobody's immune. As the planet warms up and dries down, these kinds of things will continue to happen. So I think how to adapt is now the big question.
I want to ask you about pricing because that's key to increasing adoption. And on the issue of discoms, one could say that the silver lining in the dark cloud is that if there are any freebies that are being given, those are being directly borne by the state respective budgets. That's different from earlier on. What is the pricing scenario likely to be?
I think that, pricing has already come down quite substantially. I think as we try to now indigenize the supply chain into India, you'll see prices flattening off. So solar is, let's say, at about 2.5 to 3 rupees, depending on where you install it. It'll probably remain at that level. And wind has got to about 4.5 rupees. But round-the-clock power solutions, which in some ways compete with coal, are still cheaper than the alternative baseload coal-based power, which is at 6 rupees or thereabouts. Round-the-clock power solutions are still at about 5 rupees or 4.5 rupees. So I think renewables will continue to therefore stay cheaper.
How much progress has been made on manufacturing within the country, indigenization? Because you spoke about the supply chain. A couple of years back, there was some problems that had happened. Where do we stand today?
I think we stand in a pretty good spot right now. As far as solar is concerned, we have enough module manufacturing capacity. Now the government is restricting cell imports as well starting next year. So we'll have cell capacities coming up, and then eventually the same will happen to wafers and then to polysilicon. And eventually, I think 5 to 7 years later, we'll have fully got a localized solar supply chain. In wind, that is already the case. Then that, remaining is batteries. And I think in batteries also there was a PLI program. There are several people setting up capacities. So I think that will happen also over the next 5 to 7 years. So I think by 2030, India would have not just got to 500 gigawatts, but we also would be having a very active supply chain developed and an ecosystem developed of people, of execution capability. And that is why post 2030 is when the fun will really start, because after that we'll have to start doing 500 gigawatts every 3 years or every 4 years. That's the pace that we have to get to our Viksit Bharat targets by 2047.
One final question. Budget 25-26 is just a few days away. Anything that you would like to expect from the budget as far as your sector is concerned?
We are a little bit fortunate that the government continues to make announcements through the course of the year, and that helps us. But I think as far as the budget is concerned, there are several tax initiatives that, tweaks here and there would obviously help us quite substantially. One of those is taxing at the group level rather than at the individual subsidiary level. So we're not able to offset taxes paid at the subsidiary level against group level losses, for example. I think that is something that is allowed in the rest of the world. And in renewable energy, we have this peculiarity of having to set up multiple subsidiaries for separate different businesses, for the separate different projects. And so we end up having a lot of subsidiaries. So I think just having that tax offset will be very useful. And I think another thing that would really be useful, but it's not part of the budget, is for energy to come under the ambit of GST.
Well, that of course, I had Indian Oil here before that, and that perhaps is a multi-billion-dollar question that we still are searching for answers to. Sumant Sinha, thank you very much for your time with us here at the Davos Brainstorm. With that, it's a wrap on this conversation. We'll be back with more. Until then, goodbye.